Hello again, welcome back to Tech and AI Live London. Time for some real insight now in a fireside chat with Tia Cheang. Tia is Director of IT Data and Information Services in the UK and EMEA at Gallagher. And we're looking at embracing diversity and inclusion in technology. Hi Tia.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, yeah, really good, thank you. Wonderful to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's set the scene. What's the big so what here about diversity inclusion in technology?
Well, I think it's really important. So when we think about the future of data and AI and where we're headed with technology, we want to remove bias, and the best way to remove bias is by having diversity of thought, and that comes from different walks of lifestyle. I think it's also a societal positive thing to do. So if we can move more people into careers that are exciting, I think that's great. But also we have a significant shortage across industry when it comes to skills and headcount. So the more people we can bring in from a variety of different backgrounds and expand the lake that we're fishing in, the better. The more people we can get into interesting careers, the better I think the industry will be.
What is going wrong so far then? Why is the tech industry particularly slow to embrace diversity and inclusion fully and properly?
I necessarily think it's about embracing diversity. I just think it's about there's a certain amount of curb appeal that perhaps hasn't landed amongst diverse communities, and we need to do a bit more to begin to attract those in. I think, speaking from my own personal experience, it's actually quite a welcoming industry, but I don't necessarily think that we've had the right reach in attracting those candidates in and retaining them.
So which is it, or is it both? Is it people from different backgrounds not feeling they have the education, the confidence, the skills to allow them to apply? Or is the industry failing? Is it both?
I think it's more the first. I mean, there's always going to be small pockets where the second is true, where there are people who don't necessarily feel welcome within the industry. But I do think that when you speak to diverse communities, whether that's race or gender, that actually they don't fully understand the range of roles that are available and the sort of skills that are required across the technology industry, whether that's in infrastructure, whether that's in software development, or whether it's in data, that they can bring to the table that are of benefit. And I think those messages land better amongst the kind of traditional community we've had within IT, which has been sort of white males. But I think we just need to work a little bit harder to advertise into those other areas.
Yeah. So let's make the pitch then. Can you give me some definitive examples of where people from different communities have come into the industry and made a real difference?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing big changes across the technology industry within the last sort of 5-10 years, certainly from when I started 20 years ago. There's been a massive shift in sort of representation of different diverse communities. And some groups are better represented than others. We have a really good representation amongst the Asian community, and they contribute a huge amount in terms of moving kind of technology forward. But when we look at, say, the Black community, that is very underrepresented. But actually, when we look at the contributions that perhaps women have made over the last 10, 15 years, actually, we're now beginning to see more women in leadership roles. That's now changing. And I think it's bringing a lot to the table. I think it's bringing balance into technology and bringing new trains of thought, and I think it's really great to see.
mean, certainly, if I look at the speakers we've had the pleasure and privilege of having on this event today, we've had people from all sorts of ethnic backgrounds and genders, and that's really rich. That doesn't strike me as at all out of the ordinary. In fact, it's exactly how it should be. But if that's not reflected in industry, what do you want companies to do and industries to do specifically?
I think there's an amount of outreach that we can do. We look at attracting individuals from diverse communities, whether that's race, gender, ethnicity, religion, whatever that happens to be. It's all about diversity of thought. But it's no good trying to sort of convert people at age 18 just when they're getting to university if they've never really had an interest in technology. So I think there's a lot that some of the big corporations can do around grassroots work, and you see this a lot in schools outreach. A lot of big businesses now do that, where they go into schools and they start to educate children about sort of careers in technology and expose them to the sort of kind of tools that they might be using. And it's very kind of child friendly. It might be robotics, it might be something fun, but I think there's a lot to be done in that space. I think there's also stuff that would be really useful. I mean, if I think back to when I started, a couple of decades ago, there was a lot of sponsorship and scholarship schemes for children who wanted careers and needed help to get through university, and those seem to have vanished. And so actually it'd be really great to see some of those come back and aimed at recruiting from diverse communities.
Yeah. So how does an organization that isn't there yet, how does it approach integrating diversity and inclusion into the core values and practices of the organization?
Yeah, when we think about what diversity and inclusion is, I mean, diversity is about getting people into the door. It's about your recruitment. But then inclusion is really about making people feel at home within your business and creating an environment where they feel that they can thrive and that they feel that they want to stay and be retained. So you need to look at it as two sides of one coin. And when you're thinking about diversity, you're thinking about how can I attract people in, and how can I make sure that my adverts are appealing to everyone? How can I make sure that they aren't putting unnecessary barriers in place that would stop people applying or that would deter potential candidates from coming to your business? And this is particularly relevant when you think about disability. So if you're thinking about reasonable adjustments that could be offered at interview stage, that's really important when you're thinking about diversity. And then when you think about inclusion, really what we're thinking about is how can you act towards your employees in a way that they would feel respected and that they feel like that the role that they do is worthwhile. And a lot of that is about gathering those key individuals within your business who perhaps do come from diverse backgrounds and getting their inputs. You will have within your business, even if you only have a few, individuals who will have some really great insight that perhaps from your own walk of life you don't necessarily have that insight. So use them, bring them together into communities and ask them, how can we make the working environment more inclusive for you? What would you like to see? And drive it out from there. It really needs to be a staff-focused initiative that's driven from the bottom rather from the top down.
Exactly. It seems to be a no-brainer to say that if you engage your workforce in the way that you've described, you retain people and you're retaining top talent. Have you come across examples where that hasn't happened, or where it's happened brilliantly in an organization that you've worked for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be organizations are always going to make missteps along the way, and it's whether that's intentional or not. Where I've seen it done incredibly well. When I worked for a while in the NHS, there was some fantastic work that was done around diversity, particularly around neurodiversity, and what could be done to ensure that reasonable adjustments were in place. Most people aren't comfortable disclosing disability. It's perhaps the last bastion of inclusion when we think about, when you have those check boxes when you apply for a job. Most people aren't comfortable disclosing disability because of the implications that can have around sickness, around so on and so forth. And so it'll be the one area that is skipped and overlooked. And when we look at representation, it should be about 1 in 4 people in the UK have some kind of disability or long-term condition. But in reality, it's only about 2% representation in the workforce that are disclosed. And when I worked at the NHS, we did a big initiative to make sure that actually of our staff who, in technology, neurodiversity is really, really common and probably over the average level within the population, to make sure that actually we were creating an environment where they could work. So that was things like getting rid of certain types of lighting within the organization, making sure that all the windows had blinds because of light sensitivity, which is quite common within kind of the autistic spectrum, making sure that staff had appropriate coaches and guidance wherever that was necessary, making it a front door policy to say, if you're applying, we are a disability confident employer. We have, you can have reasonable adjustments right from the very beginning, where you are applying for roles. When you're having your interview, would it be better to have that done over Teams rather than face to face? All of those kind of considerations help you bring in candidates that perhaps might not have applied previously. And this is something that perhaps people are a bit naive to when they're creating their application and interview processes, that they are putting in barriers inadvertently that would stop other people applying.
Does it cost much? Does it take much effort to make reasonable adjustments?
No, I don't think it does. For most people, reasonable adjustments can be something as straightforward as having flexible working. And in other cases, if you need something very significant, say, for example, you're a wheelchair user, maybe you might need a ramp, for example, installing. There's actually government grants where they will pay for that on behalf of the company through the Access to Work scheme. So as a business, the benefits of hiring individuals who come from those diverse backgrounds, and just because you have a disability, for example, doesn't mean that your work will be less. And actually, I myself am disabled. I walk with a stick, but actually my ability to type is fine. My ability to think and articulate myself is great. Well, at least I'd like to hope so. But it doesn't stop me from having quality output of work. And I'd like to think that that everyone has strengths that they can bring to the table. And if we can offset those costs, particularly through, as I say, government grants, then there should be no reason why a company is footing the bill for those costs.
You touched on something there that was going to be the theme of my next question, which was just asking you to expand a little more on what bringing in people from different backgrounds, different lifestyles, different personal lived experience can make, and to the bottom line even for a company.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we all, if you have a company, regardless of whether that's profit, non-profit, charity, whatever that happens to be, whatever your organization is focused on, we all serve diverse communities. So not everyone of your customers or your clients or even your service users are going to be a sort of from one group, whether that's white, whether that's male, whether that's female. We all service people from all different kinds of backgrounds. And if you have those types of individuals within your business, you better understand your customers or your clients or your service users. So it's really important to have that, that diverse input into how you build your business, into your business's operating model, and into your products. So if I take some of the stuff, for example, at Gallagher, we sell insurance or a brokerage. Well, actually, what would happen if, say, some of your customers were blind? If you don't understand visual impairment, then how are you going to design your website appropriately, for example, if they want to sell online? Or if you're selling purely through a call center, how are you going to deal with deaf clients? Or if some of your clients, I don't know, speak multiple languages, maybe English isn't their first language, how are you going to tackle that, and how are you going to deal with it or manage some of the different cultural variations that you might expect in different communities, unless you have that within your staff complement to draw upon as expertise. So I think it does make a huge difference when you are designing products and services for your customer base.
Do you know, that touches on something that 2 or 3 of the people we've heard from today have mentioned as key pillars in the development of AI and technology, which is having an eye to what is at the bottom line. What is it that customers want? That's the question, and the answer to that question is what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. You know, I'd like to think that when we're designing products, we always have a sense of what the end point is. You know, what are we designing for? What is the purpose? And there are always going to be constraints that we need to put in place. And when I think about bias, I think it's also about identifying bias. And if you have a team of individuals who aren't particularly diverse, then you're not necessarily even going to identify that there's bias in your models, in that training, that's falling out of the other side. And so, one, it's about removing that from some of the data, but it's also about identifying bias where you see it, you know, when you're coming to testing. And unless you have some diversity within your team, then you're really going to struggle with that.
Unconscious bias is quite a thing across a lot of organizations. Do you see that as the particular problem or just another problem, and how should it be tackled?
I see it as, for me, I see it as just another problem. Yeah. I mean, the statistics show that whilst we can do training on unconscious bias, and I think it's a positive thing to do, you know, to try and move your workforce forward. But the statistics show that actually the training doesn't make a huge difference, if at all. But I do think that actually bias is improving. You know, we look at, you know, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, are we in a better place now than we are then? And I think it's more around sort of shifting cultural norms than necessarily a 1-hour training exercise. I'm not necessarily sure that you can shift someone's mentality in the space of a few hours of training versus, you know, sort of societally, how can we move forward and improve how we view other groups? I do think that how we treat employees and how we manage some of those biases can be tackled. But again, it comes from having diversity. So say, for example, you're interviewing candidates. If you have a diverse panel, maybe it's not, maybe instead of all women or all men, you have a mixture of both and you have a mixture of races, then actually that removes a lot of that bias, because you're drawing from different opinions and different lifestyles, and tackling it that way, I think, is probably more successful than perhaps doing a training exercise for an afternoon on unconscious bias.
And it's about how you embrace it culturally, isn't it? Sorry, we've had a question come in from John, who's also commented how much he's enjoying this and how much he's getting from this discussion. And he asks, what are your thoughts on how to get more women into executive leadership positions in tech?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this in a variety of different spaces, whether that's race or whether that's around gender, around how we can begin to coach and mentor those individuals. I myself are on a number of different mentoring programs. I mentor quite a few candidates to bring them into the executive space. But we also see initiatives like Women in Data, Girls Who Code, and they all have different levels of coaching and mentoring for diverse communities. I've also seen them for ethnic minorities, and I think that is really, really key. But I also think, going back to sort of where the conversation started, some of those key conversations need to be encouraged amongst the diverse communities. So, for example, if we take promotion opportunities as an example, if a woman sees a role, she will only apply 60% of the time if she meets 100% of the role, whereas a man will apply 90% of the time if he meets 60% of the role description. And so we do need to do a little bit more in terms of education and coaching those individuals to apply for roles that perhaps they don't necessarily feel that they are ready for, and encouraging them to say, actually, you are ready. And there's perhaps a bit of insecurity there that we need to kind of tackle with them, and they do need, in some cases, not all, a bit more support and encouragement to access those senior roles. And I think with good mentoring schemes, that is absolutely possible.
It still remains amazingly such a significant issue, and yet the answers are not rocket science, are they?
Absolutely not. I think small changes along the way can make a huge difference, right from grassroots through to the C-suite roles, where with the right support, individuals can indeed thrive and progress quite easily.
So just wrapping up now, what do you think are the crucial future steps for the tech industry in particular to work on to ensure that it is properly embracing full diversity and full inclusion?
Yeah, and I think when I look at diversity inclusion now to where it was 20 years ago when I started, I was the only woman working in a department. Things are different now, but it has taken quite a while to get there, and that's been through diversity schemes that encourage children to kind of move into technology roles. It has been through coaching and mentoring. It has been through scholarship schemes. And I think some of those programs we are beginning to see fall away in that sort of pre-employment phase. And then when we look at what we do in an employer position to bring in diverse candidates, I think we do need to be clearer around what the role looks like. What is the minimum job description in terms of, these are the minimum requirements and these are the nice to haves, and splitting those out actually helps us bring in diverse candidates. I think things like having disability confidence schemes, being really open about if you have disability working groups or ethnic minority working groups, LGBTQ stuff, talk about it, put it in your advert so that people understand what your workplace is going to be like when they come and join. And be really clear around what your personal development looks like for not just one group of staff, but actually all staff. We all need we all need personal development. We all need career plans. And actually, when you think about diversity, we tend to think as diversity as being one thing. So a person can only be diverse in one way. But actually, when you look across the full spectrum, most people fit into one diversity box one way or the other. And it is about making sure that all people are included. So how can we do that and make sure that actually the workplaces that we are creating welcome everybody, whether that happens to be religion, race, ethnicity, ability, whatever that happens to look like. It is just about building a nice place to work that is inclusive, that gives us a good career path. And if we can begin to distill what that looks like for any one individual, then I think we're making huge leaps forward.
Tia, that's really, really amazing insight into the very. It shouldn't be a challenging world, should it? Diversity and inclusion. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is for some organisations. But I've enjoyed those insights immensely, and some takeaways for people watching to use perhaps within their businesses, I hope.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I think for me. I suppose the one takeaway is that, I think sometimes we can look at diversity inclusion and say, well, actually, it's really bad. We can't, people from diverse communities can't really get there. And I kind of look at it a little bit differently. And I say, well, actually, with the right support, it's absolutely possible. So I come from an ethnic minority background. I'm a woman. Women in tech are kind of not necessarily as rare as they used to be, but they're still quite, we're still underrepresented. I'm neurodiverse. I'm disabled. I tick a lot of those boxes. And if I can still make it to, be in the senior leadership team, then it's absolutely possible with the right support. Now, I had that support growing up. I was part of the Women into Science and Engineering, the WISE program, and they picked me up quite early on. And throughout my career, I've made sure that I've leveraged coaches and mentors to get me to where I needed to be. But it's absolutely achievable. If businesses implement the right kinds of processes to attract people. And it's absolutely possible as an individual, if you want to access those roles, if you seek the right help. And a lot of these kind of mentoring programs, they're free to access, they're available online. Just Google them, send them an email and say, I want a mentor, and they will provide one for you. So definitely don't think that there's huge hurdles in your way to accessing those senior roles or having a fruitful and enjoyable career in technology.
Sure, the word is it's an opportunity both for the individuals and for the companies. Tia, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.